Before you listen, if you enjoy the stories and want to hear more, then please consider subscribing. Most of you listening aren't subscribed, so please take this time to subscribe. Turn on notifications so you'll never miss a story and be the first to hear. You'll also be supporting me. Thank you. Closest friends and I decided to take a much-needed girls' weekend trip to Cornwall together to relax and unwind. We rented a cute, secluded farmhouse-style Airbnb in a tiny rural village, though I honestly can't recall the exact name now. Our first night there ended up being incredibly eerie and unsettling, as we arrived past 10 p.m. to find a remote location pitch black and isolated. But the cozy, rustic Airbnb interior initially put us at ease temporarily. However, increasingly strange and inexplicable events kept happening during our stay, yet my friends just laughed it off after the trip ended. But I know in my gut that something sinister and supernatural lurked within that house. We arrived at our vacation destination, exhausted after the nearly 5-hour drive, but thrilled to finally be able to start our girls' weekend. Trying to navigate the narrow, winding country backroads with no lights or signs in the complete darkness made me feel suddenly uneasy and question more than once if we were well and truly lost. Finally, we were able to spot the quaint Airbnb farmhouse in the distance, identifiable only by a few dim lights visible inside since the exterior was shrouded in blackness. The complete and oppressive darkness surrounding the isolated remote farmhouse only heightened our creepy feelings pulling up. Using the lockbox code provided, we nervously entered through the unlocked front door. My 3 friends now were initially relieved to find a beautifully decorated and immaculately clean farmhouse-style interior welcoming us, instead of something more ominous or unkempt. Doing a quick tour, it looked even nicer than the listing photos. We picked our cozy bedrooms and headed straight to bed, deciding to just unpack fully the next morning since it was already past 11 p.m. The next morning, we were all up bright and early, ready to start our day of hiking on the gorgeous scenic cliffside trails along the coast that we had researched. After driving to the trailhead, we enthusiastically spent a couple hours trekking and taking in the breathtaking ocean views. However, at a certain point, we came to the uneasy realization that we must have lost the path at some junction, as we were clearly no longer on any marked hiking road. With no cell phone service in the rural area and no idea how to get back to our car, we decided to wait down the next vehicle we saw. Luckily, a friendly local man in a pickup truck soon came along and kindly offered us a ride directly back to the address of our Airbnb. That first evening, after cooking a big homemade dinner together in the farmhouse quaint kitchen, we were all sitting outside on the back patio relaxingly chatting and drinking some wine. Out of nowhere, we distinctly heard the very clear and unmistakable sound of a heavy wooden door slowly creaking open. This was immediately followed by it loudly slamming shut again. The alarming noise very clearly came from the backside of the house, though we were perplexed because we could not actually see any door or determine what exactly it could have been. We nervously laughed it off in the moment and headed inside to get ready for bed, but remained completely on edge given how isolated the property was. As we were all walking back inside, I suddenly felt something firmly grab and pull on my jumper from behind. I instantly froze in sheer terror before breaking free and sprinting back into the house as fast as I possibly could without looking back. My friends were startled by my frantic reaction, and I was shaking too badly to explain what happened in the moment. We swiftly locked the doors, and I spent the rest of the night too frightened to leave my room, with the image of some evil, unseen entity clutching my clothing haunting me. I was too disturbed to sleep all that night. As we were getting ready for bed, I couldn't shake an intensely foreboding feeling that we were being watched through the windows, though I told myself perhaps it was just paranoia. I noticed a couple of my friends seemed equally uneasy, practically jumping at the slightest small noises and having extremely fitful trouble sleep that night. I kept having vividly terrifying nightmares of a shadowy dark figure lurking right outside my bedroom door or window, though I mostly wrote them off as just being amplified nerves from sleeping in an unfamiliar place. However, sometime past midnight, I was suddenly awoken to the unmistakably loud and jarring sound of something extremely heavy falling or crashing down with force on the first floor below us. The reverberations shook the whole house. My 3 friends were all still fast asleep in their rooms, so I was far too afraid to go downstairs alone and inspect the source of the chaotic noise in the pitch blackness. I tried convincing myself it must have just been a large antique decoration falling down somewhere on its own in the drafty old house. Eventually, after much difficulty, I managed to fall back into a restless sleep. Come morning time, I went to the upstairs bathroom and was completely startled to find a large vintage picture frame laying shattered on the floor that had previously been securely hanging on the wall right outside the door. The antique glass within it was fully shattered into jagged shards strewn about. I immediately recalled the loud crashing noise I had heard in the dead of night and realized this must have been the heavy object that fell. But it made my blood run cold, as this frame had been completely stable and centered on its nail before. There was truly no natural explanation or draft that could have made it drop off and break on its own like this during the night. I decided not to mention the bizarre and unsettling incident with the picture frame to any of my friends, as they had already been teasing me for being overly jittery and scaring easily throughout the trip. On our final morning there, however, I felt an exceptionally strong and urgent desire to leave the rural Airbnb property as early in the day as possible before checkout time. The entire atmosphere just held a haunting, sinister vibe and energy that I could no longer ignore or rationalize. My friends didn't understand my sudden impatience to quickly pack up and flee the premises, laughing it off on the long ride back home. But even now, years later, I still get deeply chilling goosebumps up my spine when I think back to our time spent in that remote haunted farmhouse rental and can recall the pervasive sense that something otherworldly and evil lurked there. Though my travel companions had brushed off my unease as harmless overactive nerves and imagination, I sincerely trust what my body and intuition picked up on. There are just some places that seem to have strongly dark, threatening energy far beyond what can be explained rationally. Ever since, I've refused to stay anywhere too isolated or remote in nature after that fateful trip to the ominous Cornish countryside. I was traveling all the way to New York City for a massive sold-out concert that I had been looking forward to attending for many months. In an effort to save some money on accommodations during my quick trip, I made the fateful decision to book a small studio apartment rental found on Airbnb for my one night in the city rather than splurging in a hotel room. When I initially checked in and arrived at the apartment, everything seemed perfectly nice, normal, and fine on the surface. However, over the very disturbing course of that night, I ended up having an intensely unsettling, hyper-realistic nightmare about someone shadowy, sinister watching me sleep. Even worse, I was later awoken by extremely aggressive, pronounced knocking at the apartment door that had positively no human source or explanation behind it when checked. Combined, these frightening occurrences made this easily one of the most bizarrely terrifying and haunting nights of my entire life. In the light of day after, I was left with full certainty that this modest apartment had been utterly haunted by some sort of dark and malevolent paranormal presence lurking within the very walls. I arrived into the massive, overwhelming concrete jumble that is New York City in the late afternoon the day prior to the highly anticipated concert. After taking a nauseatingly long and crowded subway ride to the downtown address provided on my reservation paperwork, I was pleasantly surprised and reassured to find that the apartment was located in a nicer, relatively upscale, multi-story red brick residential building situated in a quiet, tree-lined neighborhood with ample free street parking available nearby. The compact studio unit itself, while certainly not palatial in square footage, was clean, neatly and modernly decorated and furnished, and generally comfortable enough, making it seem perfectly fine for my purposes of this quick solo overnight trip. After dropping my bags off and settling in briefly, I decided to take the opportunity to venture out and grab some dinner at an inexpensive local restaurant that I had thoroughly researched on my smartphone earlier, which seemed to have great reviews for tasty food and generous portions. Following the energy-restoring meal, I was completely exhausted from the hectic day, navigating the cramped germ tubes of public transit to arrive into the massive, noisy city from my quiet hometown. I could feel a heavy jet lag setting in fully, so I just wanted to get a solid night of deep sleep and properly rest up before the exhilarating concert slated for the following evening. I remember I was out cold, sleeping soundly by 10 p.m. that night, which was even earlier than my usual bedtime back home. However, as I initially drifted off into unconsciousness that fateful night, I began experiencing a vividly real and horrifically terrifying nightmare, where I sensed there was someone or something present, standing or lurking silently in the darkest shadowed corner at the foot of the bed within the studio apartment. It was simply watching me intently as I slept in the vulnerable, unconscious state. There was an incredibly oppressive and sinister feeling of foreboding attached to this voyeuristic phantom presence. Inside the haunting dreamscape, I abruptly startled awake in a sheer panic before frantically turning on the bedside lamp to fully illuminate the room. But after hurriedly scanning every inch, I saw that physically at least, no one was actually there in the corners, closets, or under the bed. My pounding heart and panicked breathing eventually slowed back down to semi-normal levels as I convinced myself with great difficulty that it was only an extremely visceral nightmare. I was in fact still completely alone in the locked apartment. After thoroughly double-checking that the front door remained securely locked and chained, I attempted to fall back into a restless light sleep once again for the remainder of the night, though I still felt highly unsettled by the all-too-real nightmare. However, sometime around 2 a.m., I was harshly jolted wide awake yet again, but this time it was by an extremely aggressive and relentless pounding at the studio apartment's front door. It was loud enough that I could actually feel the reverberations of someone violently striking the door under where I had been attempting to sleep. Initially disoriented, I just lay there paralyzed listening to the unnerving noise in total darkness and fearful silence for a good minute or so, trying in vain to convince myself that I must surely have imagined the jarring sound. But then, even louder and more pronounced than before, the frenzied, frantic banging came again, the chaotically pulsating noise now clearly reverberating throughout the tiny confined walls and shared air of the small unit. With my heart essentially beating straight out of my chest in sheer terror, I worked up every last ounce of courage I could muster and called out timidly, "Hello? Who's there?" from the perceived safety of the bed covers. However, only pure sinister silence followed my questioning without a single audible response or sign of human disturbance whatsoever. With my palms now slit with panic sweat, I slowly got out from under the warm covers and apprehensively approached the apartment door, still tightly chained and locked. I peered intently through the peephole, desperately hoping for some kind of rational or illogical explanation for the complete chaos I had just audibly experienced mere moments before. However, all I could see was the long, empty hallway, partially obscured in shadow, completely vacant, and still with not a single shadow, silhouette, or sign of life in sight in any direction down its length or in the stairwells. My hands shook violently as I cautiously opened the front door the slightest crack allowed by the chain, in hopes of getting to the bottom of the situation. But still, there was not even a single living soul or other being present in the entire area immediately outside of my room to account for the pounding loud enough to wake the dead. Thoroughly freaked out to my very core, I swiftly ensured that the lock and deadbolt were doubly secured before timidly crawling back into the bed, glancing around wildly and feeling more terrified than I ever had previously in my life. But for the remainder of the night, every single slight ambient noise, creak, groan, and routine sound of the old apartment building made me practically leap straight out of my skin with fright. I found myself completely unable to drift off again, nervously fixated on the door and anticipating another malevolent supernatural visitation to emerge from the shadows when I least expected it. The intensely palpable sinister energy that was left lingering in that room felt undeniably otherworldly in the worst way. I was so excited when my friend Alan and I booked that cute little cottage in the countryside for a weekend getaway. The owner seemed nice enough when they gave us the keys, but they did warn us not to go into the basement under any circumstances. I thought it was a bit odd, but didn't think much of it at the time. The cottage was cozy and quaint, filled with antique furniture and charming decor. Alan and I spent that first evening relaxing on the back patio with some wine as the sun set behind the trees. It was so peaceful and idyllic. I took in the fresh country air and listened to the birds chirping while Alan told me about his new job. After finishing off our bottle of Merlot, we headed inside to unpack and settle in. The cottage wasn't very big, just a living room, small kitchen, bathroom, and one bedroom. Alan said he didn't mind crashing on the lumpy couch so I could have the bedroom. I teased him that I knew he just wanted to be able to sneak outside for late-night cigarettes without disturbing me. We heated up some leftovers in the rickety oven and ate dinner while playing Scrabble at the antique dining table. Alan ended up winning 2 games in a row, but I suspected he was cheating to get those high-scoring words. We were having so much fun together, just like old times. I was really looking forward to spending the whole weekend with my oldest friend. Later that night, as we got ready for bed, I started to hear some strange noises coming from underneath us. It sounded like rustling and soft whimpering. I figured maybe the cottage had some critters living in the basement or crawl space, but the noises sent a chill down my spine. Alan said he heard them too, but that I was probably just scaring myself after the owner's warning. I did get a little freaked out, imagining possums or raccoons running around down there. Alan laughed at me, calling me a scaredy cat. I threw a pillow at him before retreating to the quaint bedroom with its creaky four-poster bed and floral quilt. As exhausted as I was from travel and wine, it still took me a while to fall asleep with those odd sounds coming from below. The next morning, I found Alan already awake and brewing some strong coffee in the kitchen. He teased me again about hearing things in the night. I swore the noises were real, but he just rolled his eyes dramatically. We spent the day exploring the sprawling woods around the cottage and then lounged by the glistening pond on the property. It was nice to bask in the warm sun and breathe the fresh air. That evening, we barbecued some burgers on the back patio and ate outside again. As the sky grew dark, we went back inside to play more board games. I was really cherishing this quality time with my friend. Our busy lives usually made it hard to find a chance to reconnect like this. I was reminded of all our childhood sleepovers, staying up way too late laughing and telling stories. Back when life seemed so simple and carefree. But that night, the odd sound started up again, even louder and more pronounced. It was unmistakable. Something or someone was down there. The scraping and moaning continued on and off through the night, making it impossible to sleep. I pulled the covers up tight and tried to convince myself it was just some ordinary animal noise, but a sense of dread washed over me. In the morning, I told Alan I wanted to get to the bottom of this. He refused, saying we should respect the owner's rules about not going into the basement. But I was really freaked out and worried someone needed help. Alan warned me not to do anything stupid. I did consider sneaking down there when Alan wasn't looking, but each time I would psych myself up to investigate, the fear would take over and I'd back down. I didn't want Alan to think I was crazy, so I dropped the subject. The next 2 nights were the same. The ominous sounds would start up as soon as we got in bed, sending shivers down my spine. I hardly slept a wink. Alan suggested we leave early, but I wasn't ready to give up our weekend getaway. I just drank more wine at night to take the edge off. On our last day, we went for a long hike in the woods. The fresh air and exercise helped clear my head. I started to convince myself that it was probably just some animal noises echoing through the vents. Alan said he was proud of me for not obsessing over the sounds anymore. I realized I just needed to relax and enjoy our vacation. But our last night at the cottage was when the noises got really out of hand. It sounded like someone was trapped below us, screaming and banging on pipes. Alan still refused to check the basement or call the owners. He said he was done discussing it and just wanted to go to sleep. I tossed and turned all night, unable to block out the cries from below. At one point, I thought I heard a woman's voice pleading for help. I shook Alan awake in a panic, but he yelled at me to stop letting it get to me. But I couldn't ignore those tortured screams. I paced the cottage in anguish until the sun came up. By morning, I was a jittery mess. I felt guilty leaving whoever was down there, if someone was actually down there. Alan said it was just my overactive imagination playing tricks on me. He packed up the car as I took one last look at the cottage, wondering about its eerie secrets. I considered leaving an anonymous tip with the police just in case. Alan reminded me that we had no real proof of anything sinister going on. He said we should just be thankful for a nice weekend away and get back to our normal lives.
Thanks for listening in. If you like these stories and want to hear more, then please subscribe and like and support this new channel. We have more stories for you to listen to.